Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we're going to talk about Spine 281, Jules and Jim, directed by François Truffaut, 1962. The plot of it is pretty straightforward. In fact, it may even be very familiar. This is a story of two friends that meet in Paris a little bit before the Great War, and they establish this lifelong friendship that survives even the Great War and a little bit afterwards. Well, sort of. Not because of the war, but the thing that complicates it is a woman who enters their lives named Catherine, and resulting in probably the most intriguing love triangle ever committed to cinema. This is based on the semi-autobiographical novel by Henri Pierre Rocher. What makes this film interesting cinematically is that for its time, it was a different way to approach period material. And even though it was only, by the time it was made, it was pretty much 40, 50 years back, I think it's fair to say that you can call it period. Paris of 1962, it looks nothing like Paris 50 years ago. So what was interesting is it's a different way to approach how to film it, or another way you can call it is that this is a period piece done Nouvelle Vague style. Whereas before, and actually this is very much a reflection of the Nouvelle Vague. One of the things that defined them, and particularly the critics that wrote for the Cahiers du Cinéma, is they really didn't like the French films that were made at the time. I don't know if it was a term that they devised or this was just something that was contemporaneous, but there's what's called the cinema of quality is what pervaded in France in the 1950s, and these were films that were either based on great French literary works or evoke great French literary works, and the emphasis was on preserving as much of it as possible and a very lavish production design. And for the Cahiers critics, and particularly Truffaut and Godard also to some extent, this was not particularly interesting. And so Jules and Jim, in a way, is kind of an answer, is a cinematic answer to that. While it is a period piece, it also feels very contemporary. And a lot of it has to do with the way that the camera moves. Raoul Cottard shot the film, and his great contribution to the Nouvelle Vague. I mean, everybody talks about the directors, but there are other people who were involved that really made the Nouvelle Vague what it was, and Cottard is definitely one of them. He brought into the Nouvelle Vague using lighter cameras. I mean, they're still pretty heavy, but they were lighter certainly compared to, say, the Mitchell B&C cameras, these sort of big things, and also like the Technicolor cameras and so on. These were Aeroflex cameras, and they were lighter in weight, so you can have more spontaneous motion, and you wouldn't think to do that in the 50s, but here you have handheld cameras, which also allowed you to take advantage of smaller locations, and it's definitely utilized locations. To give the sense of time, you have serving as kind of interlude inserts, newsreel footage of the time to give you the feeling that, I mean, you can only do so much, and I'm pretty sure there was a fairly limited budget with this, I think it's safe to say. So to give the impression of a period of time, you obviously shoot the real footage in a way that gives it a little bit of an edge, but also I think there's also the emphasis on using natural light as well. So I think that also kind of contributes to that. Combine that with the newsreel footage, you do feel like you're in of a place. And all right, I'm going to have to, this is going to be slight confession. Because of going through all of these criterions, you get to kind of a burnout period. And I'm still going to keep going with this, but this is a title that it's been a while since I've gotten into, and I tried revisiting it, and I just was not in it. So, unfortunately, this is going to be one of those disappointing reviews where I don't really have a whole lot to say about it, which is unfortunate because it is a key film, probably not in the big way as, say, The 400 Blows or Breathless, but certainly very important, and even influential. This was a favorite of Jean-Pierre Jeunet. In fact, if you've ever seen Amélie, you have seen some shots from Jules and Jim. This is the film that Amélie sees in the theater, where she also comments on noticing little details that everybody else doesn't notice. Yes, that comes from Jules and Jim. But having said all of that, what I do admire is the creativity put into depicting a certain time. And the other thing is that this was, going back to the whole notion of cinema quality, this was an adaptation, but this was an adaptation of something that Truffaut was interested in. The story goes is that he bought the book secondhand in the mid-1950s and read through it and really liked it and wanted to do something about it. In fact, he managed to meet Rocher, and unfortunately he died before the film could be completed, so he never got a chance to see it. But he gave his initial blessing to do this adaptation. So basically so instead of doing something out of obligation, where you take on, say, Hugo or Balzac, you use books that are more recent, that resonate, and it becomes more, for lack of a better word, becomes more personal, as opposed to just saying, okay, we got to do this. I guess it would be the equivalent of if something like that happened in America, we would be expected to adapt James Fenimore Cooper or Henry James or Herman Melville, and then a group of rebellious types are really, really sick of it. It's like, why do we need to do this all the time? And instead using authors that are more contemporary, that still have a certain quality, more, not sensational commercial nonsense, but something of quality, but at the same time something that is personally meaningful. And I do get this with Jules and Jim, that this was something that was done out of love, and that's part of what I think that's a good way to describe the Nouvelle Vague. Is these were directors that they did what they did ultimately because they love cinema, and they also have very strong opinions about it. And instead of just writing about it and talking about it, there was an opportunity to make it happen through various circumstances, and this was one of the results. And maybe this is why I don't feel the strong pull, is that it's one of those things where you go back to the source, and especially if a film has had a certain cachet or influence, it seems a little quaint to go back to the source. But at the very least, you should recognize that it did start a wave, as it were. It did cascade into other films that followed a similar suit. and so in that sense, I would say it's a worthy attention. Again, it's not the biggest thing like compared to say Breathless and the 400 Blows, but certainly. But I would say that if you get into the Nouvelle Vague, let's say you have seen Breathless and 400 Blows, and you've never seen any other films from the Nouvelle Vague, and you want to get more into it, this would be another one to add on to it, and just kind of go further, and in addition to like adding on, Band of Outsiders or Hiroshima Mon Amour, and a few others. So sorry for the lackluster review, but when you have 150 titles, you can't win them all. there's bound to be some bad potatoes in the patch, as it were. So, but having said all that, do at least give Jules and Jim a spin. Especially if you like characters, and if you like a story that's dictated by a character's actions. And yes, this was sort of based on real life, so that kind of helped dictate the story. But it's interesting to see the tropes done in a more realistic manner, as opposed to going over the top or going overboard with the drama or whatnot. It's very subdued in a lot of ways, and it's a bit more realistic. So there you go, Jules and Jim. And until next time, take care.